Okay, so Glenn, by the way, Glenn is just a wonderful friend, and he oversees 3 states for the Free Methodist Church, lots of ministries, and I do want to say, you've got sometimes you have questions. You've got lawyers, you've got insurance agents, you've got bankers, you have real estate agents here. You might want to talk to somebody who's in ministry with questions. And Glenn's a great guy for that. He has been through a lot, he's seen a lot on lots of issues, and just a ton of experience. So I made the mistake of asking him, hey, what do you think are some of the hot topics that we should talk about? I got a lot from him. I'm kidding, but that was good. It was really good. So Glenn's one of those guys that I'd encourage you, breakout sessions in between, good fella to speak to. Hey, let me, I'm Robert Tyler. I'm the managing partner of Tyler & Bursch, and we have put this event on for, this is our 4th or 5th time doing it. Only the 2nd time here in Marietta. We did it last year. Were any of you here last year? I know some of you were here last year. A few of you? Okay. So our goal with this conference is to talk about the trends in ministry and where things going from a legal perspective, from an operational perspective. And it's important because as you know, we see things changing all the time. You guys are in the church business, and California, you know, they look at you and they think, hey, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that you fall in line with the rest of the state and the rest of the businesses. But for the fact that people are out fighting to try to get exemptions and make sure churches are treated differently, and you would be treated just like any other business. But there's a trend pushing that direction in Sacramento. John Giardinelli and I were in Sacramento last week, whatever it was. And we were up there at a conference, and you walk away and you say, oh my gosh, all of these laws that they're passing, how does one keep up on all of this? So, you know, for us lawyers, it's kind of job security. For others, it's not so wonderful. But the truth is there's so much going on. And so we want to go through that. We want to try to keep all of you informed. We don't have any dates set yet, but we're planning on doing this again in Orange County. We do have another event at Gateway Seminary. We're not hosting that. We're putting it on, but that's going to be in September. If you guys keep your eyes open, you'll see a little bit more about that. It'll be a little bit different than what we're doing here. Let me address just briefly the day and how things are going to work out. So first, you can see here we're going to have breakout sessions. So I'm going to give you a kind of an overview of things that are happening, things to watch out for, and then we're going to be going into breakout sessions. So the first session's at 10:40 to 11:45. We're going to do lunch. We set aside a half hour to give out lunch, we have lunch, but then come back. You can bring it into the rooms in the breakout sessions, and you can eat there, ask questions, however you want to handle that. The second session starts at 12:15 to 1:20, so that's session 2. Then session 3 is 1:30 to 2:35. And then what we'll do is we'll come back, and we're going to be gathering questions throughout the day. So have you all been handed a notepad? Desiree? Notepads for questions?
Yes.
They've all been handed one?
Yes, and if you didn't get one, they're back here.
Oh, boy, you're a quiet group today. Okay, so those little pads, Desiree, can you hold that up, please? These little pads that you're given. We'd like to get your questions throughout the day. What are some of the significant things that you guys are wondering about? Write those questions down. We have a blue box in the back, and that's a place where you can deposit your questions. And then what we'll do at the end of the day, early afternoon, really, at 2:45, we'll come back in and we'll have all the speakers and we'll answer your questions. So I'm going to take them all. I'm going to try to get through the best questions, and we're going to go through them. You're going to hopefully get answers that maybe you had that you didn't get throughout the day. Or maybe someone else had that you didn't think about. So that's important. Okay, now the second page identifies session 1 and the subject matters. We've got 4 breakout sessions. All the breakout sessions are going to be down this hall. And are there any on the other hall? Desiree. Sorry. Are there any breakout sessions down that hall, or are they all down this hall?
They're all right down here.
Okay, so they're all going to be down this hall in the classrooms. Session 2 is in the next page, and then I made a big mistake. This is session 3, I got the wrong time down at the top, so ignore that. Session 3, it's actually what it says on front. That's what you get when you get me, you know, kind of doing the detailed stuff. But that's 132.35. Okay. All right, thank you. Thanks for letting me borrow that. Okay, so let's talk about some of the trends, where things are headed. Actually, one more thing I need to do. I want to introduce some folks to you. So we've got a lot of partners that have come alongside because, you know, it's for all of us. We have a passion and a zeal to be able to help ministry. We want to. This is not, you know, we're not charging for this. We want to further the kingdom of God through our work, what we do. And this is one of the ways that we can do it. And we can help you, whether you're a pastor, whether you're church administrators, we can help you to be able to keep your ministry afloat, keep your ministry above board, keep your ministry out of problems, do everything we can from that perspective on your behalf. But you guys all met Drake from me. Thank you, Drake, for hosting us here. You met Glenn prior, Free Methodist Church. And then we have, over here on the left, we got First Citizens Bank. Rick Annan is here. He is, all these people are people that I've dealt with personally and have had a great experience and good relationship. And so First Citizens Bank, they do lending and do work with ministries. You know, there's a lot of banks out there. They have their own lanes. They don't specialize in certain things. They do a great job for ministries. Also, on that note, John Stevenson and Rick Gilliam, these guys back here, they're not up here, but it's called Hightower Capital. And what they do is they're real estate agents, and they do a lot of work on both helping churches get financing, development, construction, tenant improvements, and expansion. And they've worked a lot with First Citizens as well for churches that have been successful there. And then we have McClure Insurance Services. Don McClure in the back. Don's got a heart for ministry. That's why he does insurance. You kind of think, oh my gosh, insurance, ministry, sometimes does that really match? Yeah, it really does, because you know there's some great insurance companies out there, but to be able to have an insurance agent that you can rely on that's going to give you the truth and help you make sure you get the right insurance. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. If you don't have the right insurance and the problem arises, that's tough. And then he has Kip Lewis with him. Kip Lewis is with Guide One Insurance. Don works a lot with Kip Lewis. Kip, nice to meet you. Tried to meet you at the beginning, but so Guide One Insurance, they're going to be here. Kip's going to be talking about security, and what he does is a lot of risk management for churches. So much of what we're talking about here today is all about risk management. Our law firm, we specialize in representing churches. We got John Giardinelli in the back. John, will you raise your hand? We have Todd Flom, and we have a couple other attorneys that will be here. And our staff is all here. Ladies, thank you guys. Desiree's been here, helping making all this get set up. And thank you, Shariah, Taylor, and Caitlin. All great people that are part of our firm and been awesome help put this on. So, one more thing. Advocates for Faith and Freedom, that's a nonprofit legal organization that we handle. We have our law firm, and we take on religious liberty cases. We often have cases where a church or individuals are confronted with the violations of their First Amendment rights when it comes to religion, and that's where we're at. We're helping them. Okay, let's get started so I don't run out of time. All right. interesting thing, and this really came up last week, and this kind of came up not out of nowhere, but how many of you guys have heard about all these data breaches that have gone on? Target, Equifax, some of these, and millions of people, Facebook, and these lawsuits have come out. And so what's ended up happening is the California legislature went and very quickly passed some legislation. My understanding, it was 2 days that they, 2 days, 2 hours. Okay, and it's crazy though. So they passed it. It was kind of one of those, okay, we got to pass it so we can read it. Okay, not many of you are, remember that joke from a few years ago? All right, and you're a tough crowd. Real tough. But the fact is that they passed this, and a lot of these folks didn't even read it. Well, now there's 30 plus amendments, and it's supposed to be going into effect January 2020, as I understand it. However, now it might be being pushed off into the Attorney General is supposed to implement it, and now maybe he's going to be given until July of 2020, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a bit of chaos in regard to this legislation. The interesting thing about this is that if you are about privacy, and you're a civil libertarian, this is a good bill. You look at this and you say, wow, something good out of Sacramento. But of course, when they get their hands on it, they can turn something good into something bad, and it can get pretty ugly. But the reality of it is the whole idea is trying to protect consumers' privacy. And this is a one of a kind for the United States. There is a general, it's called the General Data Protection Regulation, and that's in the European Union. So it's EU-wide, it's implemented over there, and so now the United States hasn't had it. There are a few different states, I'm told, that have implemented some sort of consumer privacy as it relates to online issues. However, this is going to be the first exhaustive type legislation. So we sat in on a conference, John and I, last week up there in Sacramento, and honestly, a lot of these terms were just, what does that mean? What's a megabyte? What is that? And so there's a lot of this stuff that a lot of us don't understand. So let me just talk to you a little bit about what I found out about this. So consumers have rights, as the legislature has decided regarding their personal information. Right to access, receive, and demand deletion of their personal information. Churches, how might this apply to you? Let me preface all of this with how might this apply to you? It might not, because theoretically right now it's supposed to apply to businesses. Is a church a business? How many of you sell anything at your church? Like you get something in return. You get money in return for giving something. Anybody? Yeah? What do you do? Yeah. Yeah, you do a bake sale. Something that, okay, so used clothing you might sell. Back there. Books, bookstore. Anybody else? Cafe, coffee, etc. Anyone else? T-shirts, clothes, yeah. Okay. You put on conferences sometimes, you charge, you ask people to pay. Put on events. Okay, so the question right now is the church going to be deemed a business? And I'll tell you that one of the things we're going to talk about this a little bit further in slides, that there's this push to try to bring churches into the arena of business and to not be exempt from law. So at this point in time, arguably in this first round, churches are probably going to be not included under the California Consumer Protection Act. But you might be, and you might be in the future. By the way, this information, it's retroactive, so what happens is when a consumer has the right to access and the right to be able to demand the information that you have on them, you you are going to have to, if you're a business, you're going to have to be able to provide them a copy of what you have on them. Name, address, date of birth, do you have their social security number? Do you have, what other personal information do you have? Personal information, I'll give you a definition, but it's extremely broad. So there's the consumers have the right to prevent you from being able to transfer their personal information to third parties. And they also have the right to an opt-out, where they can demand that you not give their information to third parties. So, theoretically, this is good stuff. I mean, I don't like the fact that, when I'm online and I just did a search on Google for, I don't know, some tool, and then I'm over on something else and up pops an ad on Instagram for a screwdriver. And you're just, how does this happen? And so, they're gathering all this information, and I like the fact that there is some level of protection of privacy, but it's going to be confusing here. What is personal information? Information that identifies, relates to, describes, is capable of being associated with. You gather those words, capable of being associated with, or reasonably being linked, directly or indirectly, with a particular consumer or household. All right, definition of personal information. It can be just about anything that is linked to you. And there's, I want to say it's 11 different categories of information that's further defined in the code. Businesses must implement reasonable security measures. So then the question again comes back to, what is a business? This is a new law, and there's no exemption that says if you are a church, you are exempt. I actually read the law itself, where it defined, it kind of defines who it applies to in the negative. And if you are not a nonprofit, if you are not a XYZ, then it applies to you. Now, that might make you think, well, I feel comfortable, I'm not a nonprofit. There's 30 bills pending right now with amendments where the legislators are changing this thing, and this stuff happens overnight. We don't know what's going to happen with this bill. And for your church, I can think of lots of ministries that would fall under this bill and under this legislation, because they have business type operations. Maybe a radio ministry. Maybe you can think of lots of these nonprofit organizations, especially the big ones that have hundreds of thousands of contacts, data inside their databases. And I can't imagine that the legislature is going to just allow that to go without, in the end, at some point in time, saying, wait a minute, we've got to protect the consumer's privacy in the nonprofit world just like we do in the quote-unquote for-profit world. Schools, absolutely. And so the question here is for one of the things that the law says, well, a lot of times when these laws get passed, they say, okay, it's going to apply if you have more than 50,000 contacts in a year. And I ask, well, what does that mean? It could be 50,000 hits on your website. If your website retains the URL, somehow collects data when someone clicks on your website, you're able to see, oh, they checked it. This person contacted us. I don't understand exactly how all that works, but it does. The other thing it says is if you have, theoretically right now it's limited if you have $25 million or more in revenue. Well, for a lot of churches, you'll be like, that doesn't apply to us. Wait a minute. Free Methodist Church? How many of you, if there's some here with some local Free Methodist churches, I'm assuming. Basically what it says though, it says the revenue that you generate plus any of the agencies that you are controlled by. Arguably, you can be controlled by the Free Methodist denomination. So, all that to say, be prepared. Okay, this is what's most concerning about the legislation, is that what's happening right now is we're talking about a private right of action. The trial lawyers of California, really the lawyers who like to bring class action lawsuits, these are the guys that are saying, hey, we want to be able to enforce this law ourselves. Why? Because if there is a breach, if there is something that happens, they can file a lawsuit, make it a class action, and millions of dollars are going to be paid out in damages. So, who was it? There was an $80 million settlement just recently. I think it was might have been Target, Equifax, one of those. They just paid out $80 million in a class action lawsuit. So this stuff is coming. The penalties for statutory violations, this means if the Attorney General comes and enforces it upon you, there's $2,500 per violation per person. Well, really, per violation. I'm assuming an individual could have multiple violations against them. Per violation. $7,500 if it's deemed to be an intentional violation. So, important stuff. All right, what are some of the things that you should be concerned that you should think about? These are just some stuff that I don't know technology well enough to be able to come up with this myself. Frankly, I went and I was looking at some resources. Get cybersecurity insurance. Something Don McClure, Kip Lewis, they'll be talking about this in their breakout session. Important stuff. And by the way, I was looking at some of the statistics and some of the numbers. The data breaches are skyrocketing right now. In the last, I think it's like up 67% in the last 4 or 5 years. And nonprofits are a target. The very bottom one says beware of scams. Save the Children just recently lost $1 million due to a breach. One of the ways that I've read, and there's been some warnings that have been put out, is someone sends you a donation online. How many of you receive donations online? Okay, so I sent my friend Bill Walter a $100,000 gift online. And I call him up and I say, oh, Pastor Walter, I really, love your ministry, but I made a mistake. I've been listening to you online, and you don't know me, but I made a mistake. I accidentally put $100,000 when it should have been a $1,000 online donation. I just did it. I just got offline. I saw, oh shoot, I made this mistake. So, Pastor Walter, can you guys refund me $99,000? That's what happened with Save the Children. Big international organization. They lost $1 million. They sent the money back. So this is a scam that is going on presently. There's warnings that have been put out, Christianity Today and others. So be alert, be ready for that. Okay, don't retain and gather sensitive information that you really don't need. Do you need social security numbers? Do you need driver's license numbers, date of birth? Now, you might need to, if you are interviewing an employee, if it's an employee, you might need that information. Okay, then you got to protect it. But what about your volunteers? You might need it if you're doing an FBI search, right? But once that's done, delete the information. That's the tip. There's a company called KnowBe4. I haven't looked at them. I just saw this on a credible source that I was looking at, and they send out test emails to your employees, and they basically, it's a setup. It's what do they call that? Entrapment. Yeah. So they send your employees, a bogus email, and it says, oh, click here for, whatever. And they test your employees and see, apparently when they've done some of these searches, 70 to 80% of the employees in companies are violating, the standards to protect data. So they provide training and that sort of thing. That might be something you might think about doing, especially if you have a lot of people. Hire experienced IT vendors. This is huge. We just recently dealt with another nonprofit organization who had a security breach. Now that security breach came from within. And once we determined exactly what happened, we then had to go out. We hired lawyers who specialized in data security breaches. There are notices that are supposed to be sent out to all of the potentially affected individuals. Think about that for yourselves. How many people are on your church mailing list? How would that impact you? What kind of crisis might arise out of that? John Giardinelli is going to be talking about crisis management. Crisis management, we see for churches, is a big deal. How do you handle it? Churches sometimes fold, sometimes there's church splits. There's all sorts of things that happen because you mismanage a crisis. And that's something that John's going to be talking about. He's got a lot of experience in many years of practicing law, representing nonprofit organizations, dealing with crisis management. He's going to give you some tips. Public Wi-Fi, this is an interesting story. So limit your public Wi-Fi. I was reading about a story where there was a gentleman who was going into the church parking lot at night, and he was, I mean, some of you are smiling. Have you heard about this? Okay. So there's a gentleman that goes to the church parking lot in his car at night. He gets on the church's Wi-Fi. What was he doing? He was sending child pornography over the internet using the church's Wi-Fi. Oh gosh. So eventually the authorities find it. They see, where's it coming from? It's coming from the church. And so then what happens is they figure it out, and they end up realizing, okay, all right, the church is innocent. It was just some person that was using the church Wi-Fi. Dangerous, right? Think about that. Someone could go on your Wi-Fi, and I don't know how they do it, but they try to break into your system and that sort of thing. Public Wi-Fi, very concerning type thing. How you protect that, get some good IT experienced individuals. Also, copyright issues. This is a big deal. How many of you have received a letter ever saying, you know what, on your website you have a picture, and that's copyrighted by me. Pay me $2,500. Have you guys ever had that? Lawsuits? Okay, well, we've seen it. I've seen it, oh gosh, at least 3 or 4 times in my practice where we've got mistakes made like that. Okay, another emerging issue. This is some good news, and this has to do with parsonage allowance. So in Wisconsin, there was a federal district court when sued by the Freedom from Religion Foundation. The Freedom from Religion Foundation comes along and says, hey, we should be allowed, we're atheists, and we should be allowed a parsonage allowance based upon our, so-called secular faith. And the court says, or they were denied it by the IRS, and then they ended up filing a lawsuit saying, well, and it was all a setup, of course, because this is what they do. We have fought the Freedom from Religion Foundation many times. And what they do is they come out and they're doing everything they can to remove any benefit a church can get, tax credits, any funding, loans. They're so bad that what they even did to a pizza factory or a pizza restaurant in Virginia, they sent them a letter and said, hey, this program you guys have, you give a 15% discount when someone comes in on a Sunday with a church bulletin. That's illegal. You can't do that. A pizza joint saying, why can't I give a discount to people that go to church and bring a bulletin? And I want to encourage them to go to church. Freedom from Religion Foundation files or threatens to file a lawsuit. They contacted us, we defended them, and they backed off, and the case went away. But I was just reading on their website. I want to say, what are they up to lately? Well, they just did the same thing to a cafe owner somewhere else on the East Coast, and this is the kind of stuff they're doing. So they're coming after churches, they're coming after government, left and right. This is a case where they came after and said, well, we think the parsonage allowance is unconstitutional because it violates the Establishment Clause, separation of church and state. What happens? A district judge in Wisconsin says, yeah, Freedom from Religion Foundation, you're right. It's a violation of the First Amendment, Establishment Clause. Well, thankfully, it went up to the 7th Circuit, and the 7th Circuit said, no, you're wrong, Freedom from Religion Foundation. There's nothing unconstitutional about the parsonage allowance, and furthermore, housing allowances are allowed to other industries as well, teachers, camps, things like that. And so that's not going to happen. But I can guarantee you one thing. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is not giving up. They are all over this country. It's sickening. And not only do you have the Freedom from Religion Foundation, but you have the ACLU, the American Humanists, the Atheist Society all across the country. And they're coming after us. So be cautious when you're involved in issues. Keep your eyes open, especially if you have any relationship with government. Maybe you might have a program where you get a grant from the government for some sort of housing or shelter or homeless ministry, that kind of thing. Another issue. I brought this up last liability continues to be big. Continues to be big, big, big. This is, sexual harassment, right? And these things are, since the last time we were together, I think it was that, Brett Kavanaugh, all that has to happen, he was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, but prior to that time, all that has to happen is someone just makes an allegation. And in today's society, depending on who you are, we have to believe the person and assume that what they're saying is actually true. Well, we all know that it wasn't true in this one instance for Brett Kavanaugh, where Michael Avenatti makes some claim on behalf of some woman, and it turned out that the whole thing turned out to be false after he was appointed. But these things are going on. It's affecting the church. Here's a woman that came against Bill Hybels back he's in Illinois, right? The big mega pastor. And this one, it sounds like, actually was true. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think Bill Hybels resigned. So Me Too liability is a big, big deal. Now, what comes along with the Me Too liability and sexual harassment? One thing I want to say is that if there's one thing that we all see today is probably the over-sexualization of society. I mean, now more than ever, this crazy over-sexualization. And so I'll just say from the person, whether it's the internet and this or that, people in your church, good intention, Satan's just going after you. And so you have to be extremely cautious and protective in these arenas. The California legislature has come along and requires some training now, and churches, you all have to provide training. We'll talk about that in the breakout session that I'm doing on employment law. 2 hours every 2 years. This all has to be done before 2020, by the way. 2 hours of training for supervisors, 1 hour of training for all other employees. This includes independent contractors you might have. You have worship leaders who are quote-unquote independent contractors. So these are some things that is going on. We have to address this. Increasing verdicts. These are giant. $28 million in a sex abuse case against Jehovah's Witness. Now, by the way, what's happening with the increasing verdicts, a lot of them have to do with sex abuse. The Diocese of Duluth, $40 million. Montana jury awards 2 women $35 million against a Jehovah's Witness in another case. And then, there are other cases that are being brought, and this all the more why you need to be thinking about the insurance and what your limits of liability are, because too often we're seeing that limits of liability that are maintained by churches are just not enough. You guys, as the administrators often, for your churches, for your ministries, your schools, you need to be thinking about what's the potential liability. Boy, Pastor, you have the Lutheran school up the street. That's a situation where if you have, God forbid there was some sort of sex abuse case or something happened, we're talking millions of dollars in liability. Your typical $1 million limits of liability, that's just not enough these days. Here you have $3.7 million in regard to a pastor who should have received supplemental retirement benefits. How many of you would like that kind of retirement program? Pretty good. Sometimes it just takes a jury. Catholic school teacher, $3.75 million based upon her claim of discrimination because, she was pregnant out of wedlock, and so she was terminated. Guess what? She filed a lawsuit, $3.75 million award. $1.45 million awarded to a minor who, this was a situation where you have a teacher of a public school district and was involved as a church youth group leader, molested a teenager, and so there was this $1.45 million judgment awarded against both the church and the school district. You can see more. $2.25 million for someone who volunteered at a church, fell off of a ladder. The ladder was brought by another volunteer when they were painting. Fell off the ladder, severely injured, back pain, etc., etc. $2.25 million. $1.35 million to a motorcyclist because there was a woman who was driving in her own vehicle. She was deemed negligent when I think she made a left-hand turn. The motorcyclist ran into her car. car, motorcyclist is severely injured. She happened to be operating in the scope of her employment. It was her own vehicle, commercial auto, super important for churches. Talk to Don McClure about that. These are some, the sexual harassment cases, let me address this. Workplace sexual harassment range between 100,000 and 200,000, some up to 500,000. This is workplace sexual harassment, not the even more egregious situation we might have at school, molestation, etc. The child sexual abuse verdicts, $2 million to $5 million. We had a case, we worked for one organization, one ministry. They went after the pastor, the principal of the church school, the church itself, the regional denomination, and the national denomination. Guess what? They got the limits of liability on everybody. It was about, I think they wound up with $2.5+ million for a teenage boy who had a relationship with a school secretary. So, churches benchmarking. This is something I want to bring up as well. Benchmarking is this idea, another kind of emerging trend. I've already touched on it. Implied churches are being held to a higher standard. That no longer are you able to just sit back and say, "Hey, we're a church. We can operate. We're just a nonprofit, small ministry." But you're being held to high standards. So, for example, if you go to a jury. And I had a case where there was a wall that was being constructed by a volunteer in the church. And he fell off the wall. And he was injured. What was the standard of care that arose? It wasn't, what's the standard of care for a church who uses volunteers and sometimes doesn't get permits? It was, what does city code require for this wall? How should it be constructed, et cetera, et cetera. These benchmarking, these ideas, this idea that there's a benchmark for standard of care on how things should be operated. We had another situation where we had a school and we had a girl who fell over as a result of a heart condition. Her heart stopped. And we thank God what happened was the PE teacher used to be a paramedic. And when that happened, the PE teacher came immediately, did CPR, and she was able to resuscitate her. The girl lived, and then she was able to move on. Now think about that. What would have happened if she actually died? I would say that most likely what would have happened was she would have been sued, and then the standard of care would have been: do public schools provide sufficient training and have people with sufficient medical staff to be able to immediately run out and provide medical treatment when a kid's running around during PE? And I would say, most likely. Sorry, I'm having a problem with my computer here, and I'm trying to, I don't know, someone's trying to, are one of you trying to get in my system right now? Something's going on here, and I'm not understand. Okay. It won't even let me go forward. Just a minute. I'm going to see if I can get out of this little problem. There we go. Okay. Consequences: increasing cost of insurance, more liability, more claims. Parent liability. Because the judgments are getting so high, the verdicts are getting so high, what's happening is you have a church that might be sued, and then because it might be an egregious type situation, they bring in the local denomination, the regional denomination, the national denomination. They add them into it, and it used to be that there was more protection. Some of the case laws come out more recently. If there's any denominational control over a local church, they're bringing lawsuits for negligent supervision, et cetera, et cetera. And there's cases out there especially in the sexual abuse arena, to that show that the denomination can potentially be held liable. Okay, here comes the aroma. What's happening? Marijuana is coming all across the state. I don't know if you call that an aroma. It's kind of a stink to me, but we've got a case in Otay Mesa. What happened was a marijuana facility comes in and they want to move there into this complex where a church was called. What ends up happening? The church ends up having the city come to them and say, hey, we found that there's all sorts of building code violations. And, oh, and by the way, you don't satisfy the zoning code, and so you're going to have to move out. Guess who moves in? The marijuana dispensary. Why? Well, the city likes the tax revenue. So I call it the smell of money. And so a lot of times they're looking at this saying, oh, hey, we got tax incentives. Some cities, not all of them, some of them are pretty good at saying, no, we don't want them here. Others are saying, hey, we want that tax revenue. And so there's these distance requirements that says a marijuana facility cannot operate within so many feet of a church, maybe 500, maybe 1,000, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes this conflict. And so we filed a lawsuit against the city of San Diego recently for this church in Otay Mesa. The city settled with us. We won. And so, you know, I think that we're going to find this coming more and more and more as we see marijuana really flourishing in our state. A conflict between the two. Property tax collection. I've only got a second, so let me write your question down. We'll try to add that to the end. Okay, property tax collection. One of the things that I'm seeing is that with a lot of our tax revenue going away because of redevelopment funds and all sorts of laws that Governor Newsom is taking our money away, what I'm seeing is that more and more churches have to be calling us saying, hey, we've got an issue with our property. The tax assessor, the property tax assessor wants to come and collect X amount of dollars from us. And so these are issues that we're faced with, and we don't have time to go into in detail, but the California Constitution provides a tax exemption, but it's generally what we're seeing is more often where you have property that's not being used by a church on a regular, consistent basis. Here's some of the things that further that I'm seeing. I'm almost done, Desiree. It's like, we'll be done. I'll give you time to get to the next one. So, no exceptions. One of the things, we've got a lot of these new laws that are coming out. John, how many laws last year were proposed in the state of California? Do you remember? It's like over 3,000?
Last year there were about 2,500 and about 700 passed. This year, at last count, there are 2,700 laws being proposed, and they're all in various stages of development.
So last year, 700 new laws. This year, 2,700 new laws proposed, and some of them passed, some of them haven't yet. So it's here in California, it's just wild. And a lot of them aren't thinking, oh, we were passing this law, but we should exempt churches out, or we should. They're not doing that. A lot of times they just pass these laws, and then we've got to fight for some sort of exemption. In employment, there's a ton of new laws. We'll be talking about those things. Americans with Disabilities Act, same thing. There's lots of lawsuits coming along. How do churches need to comply with that? Land use regulations. We have new laws. Those things change all the time. John Stevenson and Rick Anna, I'm sure you guys are addressing that a little bit. Now there's the Federal Equality Act that's being proposed in Congress right now. And this is to add the LGBT non-discrimination provisions that a lot of states have into federal law. And so it's going to affect future hiring decisions. Up to this point in time, there was an exemption there's still an exemption to what's called Title VII, it's the federal non-discrimination law. There's an exemption for religious organizations. Another narrowing of the ministerial exception, that this is where churches have the ability to hire individuals and say, you have to be a Christian. But what they're trying to do is narrow it down and say, whoa, wait a minute. Only if they're a minister can you discriminate in your hiring practices as a church. Something we're going to be talking about in greater detail in the next, in my comment session. Lastly, security. Major issues. Kip, I think you're talking about this, right? Kip Lewis here in the security section at the end. Premises liability. Are places of worship inherently dangerous? That's kind of a thought I have. Think about that nowadays with all the in churches and synagogues and what just happened down in Poway. It's awful. Active shooter training, armed security, armed congregants. Should you allow your congregants to be armed? Got to consider your insurance. And when you get physical, with someone, at what point in time do you actually, you need to have policies in place. Kip's going to be talking about that from Guidebook Insurance. Okay, so those are my hot topics that, in my studies and my experience in the last few years of what's going on and where churches need to be thinking, Christian schools, and, just generally ministries in general. These are things you need to be contemplating and thinking of. Okay, so with that, let me conclude. There are 4 breakout sessions that we have right now. And can I see that real quick? Okay, so the first one, ministry governance. John Jardinelli, or Todd Fromm, joined by John Jardinelli. They're going to be handling that. There's guys who work in our firm handling transactional and corporate stuff, and basically helping. There's a lot that goes on from a corporate governance perspective. You need to be able to understand as a church. There was a church on Caswin Island that for 7-8 years operated, only to find out that a group of board members from 7-8 months earlier, or 7-8 years earlier, came back and said, hey, we never officially transitioned, we own the church, and kicked out the entire church after 7 or 8 years of new operations. So important stuff, ministry governance, how do you maintain all those things. And then next we're going to have Don McClure. He's going to be talking about insurance policies. Again, sometimes you might think, insurance is important. This is critically important that you need to understand. Limits of liability, what should you have? There's exclusions and endorsements and things that he's going to talk to you about. When you're looking at your insurance policies, what should you really be considering? What do you need? A lot of people just call their insurance agent and say, hey, I need to buy general liability insurance. And they get it, they pay their $5,000, and they don't know any more about it other than that. And you really need to have a better understanding because there's options for you. And then money management. Michael Klein, who I did reference, he's a CPA here at NIGRO here locally. This is important. I just had a local church call me up and said, we had $80,000 embezzled. How do you avoid that? How do you have controls? And so there's a lot of financial issues for churches, liabilities we see, that huge judgment of a pastor who should have, says I should have been paid my retirement, things like that. So you need to see Michael. Now growing your space. We've got John Stevenson and Rick Gilliam. They're going to be talking about options. What options do you have? These guys are like some of the most creative guys that I know. You might be saying, I don't have a lot of money. They look at it, they help you find money. Maybe you rent your facility out to a Christian preschool. And there's all sorts of things. I've seen them work miracles for churches especially that are outgrowing their space and they don't have the options. So with all that said, thanks for being here. We'll see you back here at the end of the or early afternoon, I guess. And please go on and locate the rooms whichever one you want to attend. Thank you.
Good job, Bob.